My name is Emma Hertz. I'm the president and CEO at HealthSpark Foundation, and I am so pleased to welcome you all here today as we share the release of Children First Report, a decade of stalled progress, opportunities stunted for children in Montgomery County. Not only is the topic of children's welfare incredibly important to HealthSpark Foundation, but as a mom of 3 little ones, it's an issue that really resonates with me personally. And so I want to thank Children First for conducting this research and for bringing us all here together today to talk about the future of our children in Montgomery County. At HealthSpark Foundation, we believe that people should have control over the policies, programs, and practices that influence their lives. We believe that people should have a seat at the table when decisions about their own health and well-being are being made. And that's why last fall, our board of directors approved our new strategic plan, which emphasizes building community power, community leadership, and community solutions as pathways to healthy, equitable, and a hopeful Montgomery County in the future. As a grant maker, we provide funding support directly to community leaders who are taking opportunities for more civic engagement to advocate for their own communities. And we're directing that funding support directly to those who have historically been left out of that decision-making table. So leaders of color, women, people who identify as LGBTQIA, immigrants, and so many others. We also support nonprofit organizations in building their own advocacy muscle so that they can educate lawmakers about issues in their own communities and help lawmakers understand how decisions being made at the federal, state, and local level are impacting residents and neighbors. And finally, we use our philanthropic power to bring together nonprofits, government, faith leaders, elected officials, educational folks, and so many others to come together to connect and learn and to jointly advocate for the systemic policy changes and the deep financial investment that we know is necessary to truly achieve opportunity and justice for all people. And that's where we are so proud to support Children First and the critical advocacy that they provide to improve the lives of children in our region. We know that together with elected officials and our community partners, we will be the difference between a thriving future or diminished dreams for our children in Montgomery County. Today, you're going to hear about how children are faring across multiple domains: economic status, early childhood education, K-12 education, juvenile justice, and child welfare. And more importantly, you will hear how public policies and funding can and are play a critical role in shaping the future of children in Montgomery County. And I hope what you hear today will inspire you to join HealthSpark Foundation and of course Children First in advocating for a brighter future for all of our children. So now I'd like to introduce, I think, a woman who needs no introduction in this room, Donna Cooper, the Executive Director of Children First.
Thanks. Thank you. And you know, we often hear when we put out our reports that a lot of people use the data in the report to make a case to great foundations like HealthSpark that more needs to be done for kids. And what you know is that on the other end at HealthSpark, that's a welcome, reinforcement of the information that they have. Thank you all for being here. We're really glad to be here. Every 2 years, or approximately every 2 years, we put out this report on the status of kids. And in this report today, we looked at the life of kids over the last decade and how are they faring. And not all of the data that we pulled today was available over 10 years, but where we could get 10 years of data, we did so. The first thing I want to point out is that there's some good news, which is most of the children in Montgomery County are being raised in families that have sufficient resources to support them. And in fact, across the 5 counties, you guys rank really high in terms of share of families where kids are doing, in terms of their family economic status, okay. But still 1/3 of the families in Montgomery County don't have enough financial resources to support their children through a healthy child development. And that number really hasn't budged in 10 years, which is why we call this a decade of stalled progress. In fact, what we know is that, and this is going to sound like a lot of money, that to raise 2 kids adequately with all the things it takes to have a great childhood, not including the trips to Disney World, costs about $88,000 a year for a family of 2. And when you break that down, that's each parent earning about $22 an hour. This is not, millionaire salaries, but it's enough based on the research from the United Way of Pennsylvania to make it possible for families to afford their rent, or if they're lucky enough to have a mortgage, utilities, transportation, clothes, food, and the other essentials. You would need to earn more than that if you also added childcare to the mix. How many kids does that mean in Montgomery County? 35,500. That's more. That is more than the seats in all of the Citizens Bank Park. So there's a lot of kids that still need the helping hand and partnership of government with their parents to make them thrive. Now, one of the things we noticed over the decade that kind of floored us is we looked at income growth over the decade, compared and adjusted it for inflation. And one of the things you see in this chart is that the green line at the top are the top 20% wage earners. And in fact, their income grew over the decade, not a ton, but it grew enough beyond the cost of inflation. But the people at the bottom lost ground. The bottom 20% wage earners, they lost ground in the decade after inflation. And so, yes, the average wage is up. People might be earning 15 bucks an hour, but as we heard this morning, inflation continues to rise unabated. So what that means is that when you add childcare to that cost, if you're dependent on childcare subsidy and to defray the cost, 6 out of 10 families who are eligible for subsidized childcare in Montgomery County can't get in. They can't get in for 2 reasons. One, the program is underfunded, so there are more kids than the program can support. But worse yet, childcare providers can't compete for staff any longer because their wages are too low and they can get a better paying job anywhere. So even a child with subsidy right now might be knocking on the door of a closed classroom where there's no teacher. But if you're paying out of pocket, so you're earning over, let's say, $50,000 with a family of two kids, childcare is taking 14% of your family income while your kid's under 5. And it continues to take a chunk of change for after-school care. This is twice the level that the federal government recommends, or at least the old federal government recommends, that child care take out of your budget. So the federal standard is 7% for families in Montgomery County. The typical out-of-pocket expense is 14%. The other thing that we know and we looked at in terms of understanding the economic reality of Montgomery County is that, interestingly, some college, just some, not even completing a 4-year degree, can cut your chances of being in poverty by 50%. So the red line at the top shows that 20% of the kids in Monco who graduate and become adults, well, adults in Monco who are adults now, let's say, or over the 10-year period, they were, the people who graduated with just less than a high school degree, they were 20% living in them in poverty. They were likely to be in poverty. 20% of people without a high school degree are likely to be in poverty. If you just completed some associate degree or a year at community college, you're going to be at 6%. So the difference between some college and no college, now we know a 4-year degree is taking the chance that you'll be in poverty down to 3%. But it's a pretty dramatic difference between 20% and 6% just by some college access. And it speaks to how do we ensure that we have schools that are preparing kids to get post-secondary training in some college. One of the pathways to post-secondary training that we looked at is what's the share of kids in Monco, even though you have terrific CTE programs, that get access to career tech ed in high school? And this is only 6%. Now, if we were looking at this data in New York and New Jersey, that number would be twice as high for any county in those, well, nearly any county in those states. So Pennsylvania in general lags, and Monco is consistent with the state in that regard. Let's dig a little bit deeper into education. So the kids who are more likely to graduate and end up in poverty are these kids. The third of kids who can't pass the English assessments. I mean, good that most kids can. Not every county can say that in Pennsylvania. So Monco schools are primarily doing well, but what we got to do is make sure we can close this gap. So we still have 34% of the kids across the county, and 3 out of 5 are struggling to meet their math assessments. So what this says is we still have educational challenges, and these numbers have not really budged in 10 years. There was a little bit of a change in the state's assessment over that 10-year period, and there was COVID. And Montgomery County, fortunately, has pretty much rebounded from COVID. But even though we have rebounded, it hasn't necessarily closed the gap further. Now, one of the reasons, but not the only, is that you have a $54 million state funding shortfall. And I saw my good friend Matt Bradford come in, the Democratic leader in the House, who has been using every bit of political capital he has to drive that number down. And I really want to make sure people know how important your local leadership has been. And in fact, your governor, your homeboy governor, Josh Shapiro, has been in driving down this number. It's just really remarkable. This was higher 10 years ago. The other thing that's happening, though, is while schools are underfunded by the state, and this is an issue across wealthy and poor districts in Montgomery County, school districts are shoveling out a lot of money, $37 million, to cyber charter schools. And it's risen by 143%. But nobody's local property taxes, nor has state funding grown by 143% in that period. So this is sort of robbing Peter to pay Paul, and Representative Scott is here, and he knows these issues very well. These are really important issues to tackle. And again, Governor Shapiro announced a terrific policy a couple weeks ago with his budget address to really cap this spending and rein in this waste in the districts. And we can talk about that further if you want. Now, the formula that was passed last year with the governor's proposal and the Democratic leaders really pushing it through is helping change this chart to go all to blue. 10 years ago, the gap for Pottstown and Norristown in terms of their educational funding shortfall was much greater. So again, there's good news, but as you can see, with Norristown still being $5,400 per kid underfunded, that's about $200,000 a classroom. That's a lot of money that we need to make up. Especially when you look at what's happening in terms of the increasing diversity in Montgomery County. And I want to give a shout out to the great county commissioners for creating the new Office of Immigrant Affairs, because as you can see, the county is a home to more immigrants, and welcoming them and offering them support is going to increase their economic prospects and the quality of life for everybody in the county. Your fastest growing population, with about 1,500 new students in the county, are Latino, but all of these populations are increasing. So it's important that schools and social service organizations recognize this increasing diversity and think about how they can make sure that the cultural competence is there, so that especially these kids can succeed when they come here. Now, one of the challenges in that cultural competency is in the county, what we found is a pretty wide disparity on teacher salaries. So some school districts are starting teachers at $45,000, others at $62,000. You can imagine that there's a little bit of a Hunger Games, because you know we have a teacher shortage. So if you are a bilingual teacher, it's a good chance you're taking a job at Upper Marion, where you're likely to start at a higher salary than in Pottstown, even though Pottstown's likely to need you a lot more. And so that's why the adequacy formula is so important in leveling the playing field and giving districts the resources they need and thinking about what it takes to have a quality teacher force here. Now I'm going to move to healthcare, because healthy kids are important to educational outcomes. Very quickly, what you can see here is the bars are the number of kids in CHIP and Medicaid. And after the pandemic, there were new rules in Medicaid that were tightened a little bit. They had been loosened during Medicaid. And so there's been a reduction in the number of kids in Medicaid, and particularly Medicaid in Montgomery County. Other counties have had much more of a reduction, so Monco's done a good job keeping its kids insured. But the fact is, we don't know if these kids are insured or they're uninsured. We just know they're not on Medicaid any longer. And obviously, the Congresswoman is here, and the other Congresswoman will be here. They'll be the first to tell you Medicaid's on the chopping block. And so these bar charts could look a lot worse in the future if we don't figure out how to make sure we protect the services for kids. Today, they approved the nomination of RFK as the HHS Secretary. And those of you who know RFK's position on vaccines may be a little bit alarmed by this as well. 71% increase in kids starting school, not with the appropriate panel of vaccines in Montgomery County. This is since 2016. Obviously, this is going to be a bigger and bigger challenge for our school districts, and I would imagine we'll have a lot of conversation about this in the near term. We have some recommendations about this, but I would just say this is a scary situation, and it's one that's putting every child at risk, not just the ones who aren't vaccinated. We also, Norristown's been a showcase of a community fighting lead, and in spite of that, in terms of passing the best lead ordinance in Pennsylvania, the health systems, they continue to underperform when it's in terms of screening children for lead. So most kids who are living in old homes across the county, we don't know if they've been lead poisoned. And this is still a challenge because we need to know if a kid's under 3 has been poisoned so they get the resources they need. So this is a public policy gap for us in Montgomery County. But even worse in my mind is the degree to which we have an unaddressed and kind of invisible physical healthcare crisis, and it's the mental health crisis among children. We found that 34% of the kids, and this is high school kids in Monco, feel sad or depressed every day. That's 36,000 kids in the county, and I will tell you that the surveys show that is across class. So it doesn't matter what class, the feeling is shared. And for every 230 people in the county, you have 1 licensed mental health professional, and you have 36,000 kids who are indicating that they need some kind of help. We have a lot of recommendations to talk about that, but this is something that dramatically needs to change, and we hope to work together with people in Montgomery County, and I know there's people here from the Behavioral Health Department, so thank you for being here, because Monco is a place where there's always been innovations and a commitment to kids. One of the good things is we're seeing, not just in Monco, but pretty much everywhere, a drop in violent crime committed by kids, a 34% drop in basically 10 years. The media will play up every time a kid commits a horrendous crime. And because it is startling, children should never do that. Obviously, no one should ever do it. But the fact is that these numbers are going down. Risky behavior among kids. This is national data. This is Monco data, but this is national as well. Kids are smoking less, drinking less, getting high less, and using e-cigarettes less. And so one of the theories on this is because they're on their phones more, and they're sitting at home and they're isolated, which may be the reason that they feel so sad and depressed. And so thinking about strategies that really get kids out in socialized spaces, but also get them mental health services is important. We also know, and kudos to Montgomery County, that 10%, there's been the number of children in foster care dropped by 10%. That means, it may mean that the county's doing a much better job in preventing kids from ever being put into the foster care system. And it may mean that families are finding resilience and support in their communities. But one way or another, this is a very good sign. Finally, I just wanted to show you what it looks like across the county in terms of where do the families who are low income live. On the map on the far left is the distribution of families by percent of poverty, so 300% of poverty. The darker areas are where families are less likely to have the resources to support their kids. They're going to be under that 88,000 that they can't really get enough together to make sure they can make ends meet. So they're making a decision about whether they take medicine today and pay their electric bill tomorrow, or they stop take a carpool instead of using their car any longer, which is probably much less reliable because they've got to make financial choices. And the map on the right is the school districts by the share of children who are low income attending them. And so what you can see is you have a pretty high dispersion of kids in the darker oranges across the county, not concentrated in just a few, although there's a few darker areas. But you do, when it comes to school districts and their attendance, have some places, which obviously are Pottstown and Norristown to begin with, that we really need to think about how the services of the government and the school district and the community and the civic leaders come together, because that's where those children are attending school, and they may live in surrounding communities. So we have recommendations, but what we wanted to do today, and I implore you to read the recommendations, and we focused on state and federal recommendations. I'm sorry, let's change that sentence. We focused on state and local recommendations. little bit on federal around the tax policy, but recognizing that we were walking into a period where the federal game, the sort of ground game in the federal government is likely to be defense, that advancing policies to affect children, we think we have the greatest promise to be able to do in the state and local level, if we can mount a successful defense at the same time against extraordinarily harmful cuts for children. So this was like a cold presentation of the data. Much more data is in the report that you have. But we wanted to move from the sort of like, what does the data say over the last 10 years and the challenges that it presents, and have you hear from folks who are on the ground in the county, who are leaders in the child care sector, in the educational sector, parents who are in both of those environments, parents dealing with mental health challenges in the county, so that you could understand this on the ground. But before we do that, as we all probably in this room spend a lot of time thinking about what's happening in Washington, and maybe some of you have left social media because it's too painful to watch what's happening in Washington, we're so grateful to have Congresswoman Scanlon here with us right now to talk with you. She's been a big champion of the research we do, but she's also a champion for kids in DC. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, and it's good to see so many folks who are, champions of the cause for kids, because it's all of our futures as well as theirs. Donna knows I've been very, very grateful to this organization for compiling these reports, because they are critically useful in the work that we do, being able to help us focus on the areas of greatest need, tell the stories with compelling data to back it up. And I'm really glad to have these reports in this moment, especially since I think the first round that I saw anyways, as I came into office, was just pre-COVID. And now we are in a different world, at least according to pandemics, with all of the aftermath that it includes as well. But Donna's right. I mean, we do have a very, very different landscape right now in Congress, in DC, and we are playing defense basically on everything. There's a budget markup going on as we speak. Brendan Boyle is the ranking member on that committee, so he's not here, and he's afraid he's going to miss the Eagles parade tomorrow because he'll still be at the hearing. But the Republicans are just rolling out their budget and their reconciliation plans, and they don't have details yet. All of their arguments thus far have been how much they can cut in order to still be able to do $4.7 trillion in tax cuts for the wealthiest folks and the wealthiest companies. So that is the game we are seeing in DC right now. It is not about expanding services. It's not about funding services. It's a very binary kind of approach to the budget, and it's what can we cut. And that's primarily from domestic spending, because they actually want to increase defense spending. What can we cut from domestic spending, programs like the IDEA and CHIP and all the things that really benefit the kids that we're talking about here, in order to justify trillions of dollars in tax cuts. So it's a pretty awful landscape that we're facing. We're starting to get information that they want to cut $880 billion from Medicaid, and that's going to impact a lot of the programs that we're talking about here. Obviously, we've been hearing a lot, including, I shouldn't do this, I'm listening to the confirmation hearings for the Secretary of Ed on my ride up here, and they want to shut down the Department of Education, and we saw some of the advocates. Senator Maggie Hassan from New Hampshire has a son with profound disabilities, and it was advocating for her son in schools that led her to advocate for other parents, which led her to become a state legislator and then a governor, and now she's in the Senate. So she was very direct about, what do you mean you're going to try to shut down the Department of Education? It was established because we were not doing a good job with educating kids with disabilities. And she got pretty direct, because the nominee said, well, we're not going to do away with everything. We're just going to kind of put it back in the Department of Health and Human Services, which had the senator from New Hampshire say, what do you mean? I mean, got a new department to try to focus on this issue, and now you're telling me RFK Jr. is gonna be in charge of it? So she wasn't buying that construct. But what we have seen as the crazy has erupted in DC is that when people are engaged and they push back, particularly on issues that don't impact red states or blue states, but all states, that we see we're able to contain damage, limit damage, sometimes get rolled back on these things. So it is really important that folks are engaged, as you are, that we have the data to back up the fact that these are really necessary programs for entire communities, and that we be able to argue from that position of strength and to make that case to everyone. I'm a member of the Democratic Party. I think you're gonna find that most members of my party are on board. So please don't be shy about calling members of other parties or people who you're not sure what party they're in, because it is really helpful. If they get that pressure, that's how legislation gets passed in DC. We saw 2 years ago, first time we had any kind of gun safety legislation in 30 years. And it happened because the folks who'd been resisting it, who were primarily Republicans, got so many calls that they just figured out they had to do something, and they went along with some changes. We got a report today from folks from the former White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention about the thousands of sales without background checks that they've been able to interrupt, about the hundreds of gun traffickers they've been able to prosecute, and the bad faith gun sales shops that they've been able to shut down. So we know that this stuff works, and we'll just need to keep making the case for a lot of it, but having folks back us up. And in particular, if you're able to reach out with concrete stories of, as things are occurring in your communities as a result of kind of the radical policy changes we're seeing, or the radical defunding that we're afraid we might see, please give us the stories so we can help explain, this isn't about faceless bureaucrats in DC. This is about our communities, it's about our kids, and it's about what's happening right here at home, because that is helpful in terms of getting other people to understand just how these changes hurt our communities, and in being able to move forward. So thank you for having me today. Of course, you do this by county, so I have a lot of reading to do. I have 3 counties, but it's actually really interesting to see some of the distinctions between the counties and know where to focus, and trying to get money for that going forward. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. It's amazing. You guys elected this terrific woman to Congress, and we know there's another Congresswoman coming, but we're going to proceed because you're lucky enough to have 2 great Congresswomen. So I would love now to ask Commissioner Winder and Kym and Sousan to come on up.
For those that don't know me, I'm Jamila Winder. I'm proud to serve on the Montgomery County Board of Commissioners. I'm proud that I've called Montgomery County home for more than 4 decades. And I'm coming to this discussion first as a mother to a 4-year-old who's getting ready to enter kindergarten. And when you think about what was just shown here, it's a little scary, right? And I come from a place of privilege. I come from a family of educators. So I've had the great fortune of being able to send Max to preschool, and I'm spending close to $17,000 a year to send him to preschool. I'm privileged. I also come to you as a product of the Norristown area public schools. And if it had not been for my education in Norristown, coupled with the guidance of 2 loving parents, I wouldn't be sitting in this role that I'm in today. But I know there are children across this great county that are not as privileged as I am. And so I want to commend Children's First for bringing about sobering statistics. But I also want to say, I know we've done a lot of great work here in Montgomery County, where we're proud to work, raise our families, and live. And so this is not about me. This is about just having a real honest discussion about what's happening as it relates to our children, their education, because we all know that they're the future generation, and we need to ensure that we invest in them and we take some tangible action so that we can combat some of the challenges that we're up against. So we're going to talk about some of those challenges. And let me get my notes here. All right, so before we do, I'd like the two of you to take a moment to introduce yourselves.
Hi, my name is Sousan Robinson, and I actually work for the IU. I work at our emotional support high school and A. Anderson School, and I work in our RISE Truancy program and some other things. But I come today as a mother of 3 sons who are all grown, that the system failed miserably. I do not have a good outcome story, which I won't share, but through that failure, I have learned a lot about what was missing and what we needed and how to best help families to get what we unfortunately didn't get. Thank you.
Good afternoon, I'm Kym Ramsey, and I am a child care center owner. I've been in child care for about 25 years, owning a business. I also come as a mother of 3 adult daughters. And I, as a person of color, realized early on that my girls were not served either. So I really got into childcare, the business side of it, to make sure that there were high quality and resources for all children. So I first had a childcare center in Skipback, and again, most of those children did not look like mine. And so I started a childcare center here in Norristown about 12 years ago, called the Willow School. So I'm still an advocate for childcare, for families, and for legislation that really support our children. So thank you for having me.
Great, thanks for being here. All right, so the first question is for you, Kym, and you and I have talked a lot about the stories of running a child care center, and I recognize there are many challenges. So the report shows that 900 children are not being served in Montgomery County because of the staffing shortage. You used to operate a child care program. Can you share what your struggles were like with hiring and retaining staff?
So first I have to say, before the pandemic, we had a crisis in hiring and staffing anyway. The wages were way too low, and so it was exacerbated because of COVID. Because of that, we could not first attract and retain quality, when I mean quality, teachers, all of them are quality, but teachers who have degrees, because I had a Star 4 school. So the requirements that most of my staff have at least a CDA or above. Majority of mine had bachelor's degrees, associate's degrees, and 2 had master's degrees. But of course I could not retain them. The competition was just the public school district, and then after COVID, it came retail. They were paying $25 an hour. My teachers with master's degree were still only at 18. And that meant that I had to not pay other things, which is myself. So as a business owner, the cost of care, or cost of doing business was much greater. So staffing was one point. So I said, we also required a lot of our teachers, particularly in early childhood education too. Lesson plans are required, observations are required, assessments, we work with IU quite a bit, behavioral health, so all of that was required of my teachers, while also caring for the child, changing diapers, feeding them, clothing them, cleaning them. So a lot is expected of our teachers. And then finally, I have to say, the lack of benefits. I could not provide health care for my staff. Most of them, too, were receiving subsidies, so they too were able to go onto the Affordable Care Act, which some of that I did subsidize. I did pay for dental, and I tried to provide a 401k program for them, but I don't think people understand in order to operate that type of program, it costs between $5,000 to $10,000 a year just for the business owner to offer that, and you can't match it, you're not able to match it. So those things really impacted the hiring and retention, and then the crisis was what I saw, the tongueful, in my business.
I've seen some of what you're talking about at Max's school. He goes to a school in Bluebell, and I think about one of his favorite teachers left probably about a year ago, and she completely switched fields. She loved being in childcare, she loved being an educator, but she wasn't making a livable wage. And so you see so many people leaving the profession that are good for the profession because they can't, they're not making a livable wage. So thank you for sharing that. Sousan, thank you for being here. In Montgomery County, 1 in 5 children experience a mental, emotional, or behavioral health disorder, yet fewer than half of these children will receive the services or supports that they need. And you mentioned about your children. Can you describe the barriers that families are facing when trying to access mental health services?
I think one of the barriers is insurance. Some people don't have insurance. Some people have medical assistance and private insurance, and that becomes a barrier because a lot of places will say, if you have both, we'll only take you if you have private, or we'll only take you if you have medical assistance. Families are instructed to drop their private insurance, which they don't do, so they get stuck there. Another barrier is wait lists. People are on wait lists for years sometimes, waiting for services that are much needed in the home and in school. I think that parents have a hard time navigating systems, so they might be given referrals, but they really don't know how to walk through that system. And they kind of give up. They kind of give up on the system. And I know I'm missing a lot. I don't know if this is part of this, but one thing that I experience is that when people are able to access services, the staff that is there doesn't have the expertise to meet the needs of the families. And I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. I know everyone is trying their best, but sometimes the families that are coming through systems, especially that have Medicaid, have very high needs, very complicated situations, and the people providing the service are new to the field, and they just do not have the expertise that's required, and so people don't get better. And then it's like, oh, well, we threw all these services at them and they're still the same. And I'm thinking, but the people weren't qualified. It takes years to develop that clinical experience. So I think that's a huge barrier as well.
Yeah, thank you for that. Oh, it's not working again. Oh, because hello? Okay, because I turned it off, that's fine. Thank you for sharing that. One of the things that we think about in Montgomery County is when families are facing a mental health crisis, where do you go? Oftentimes, this keeps going on. Oftentimes they end up in our emergency rooms, where healthcare professionals don't necessarily have the adequate skill set to your point, to solve, I promise this is not me, to solve for what the family is dealing with in crisis. And so one of the things that we're doing in Montgomery County is we're opening up a behavioral health crisis center. So we are trying to meet the moment where especially parents of young kids have nowhere to turn to. And so that behavioral health crisis center will have 5 beds for juveniles and set to open in 2025. A little commercial for Montgomery County, but I'm saying that because these are the things that the community has been sharing that we have not been doing. So thank you for sharing that. Okay, so this one was broken. This one wasn't working. Let's see. That's okay, you can help me, Carmina. This one's not working. This one's not. Okay, I'll just keep going. I'll project. Thanks, Carmina. She's always my assistant here. All right, so next for Kym. So the county report also highlights the significant increase in the cost of childcare over the past 10 years. For families who are unable to afford childcare, Childcare Works PA's subsidy system is a lifeline so parents can work. Yet only a fraction of eligible children are enrolled in Childcare Works. Why do you think that is?
I think a big majority of that is they're unaware of it. When they toured my school, particularly here in Norristown, we provided them the packets. We had a direct contact for them to meet with, and they too were understaffed. at the ELRCs or the caseworkers. So it took them a while to get the application in. Sometimes they needed assistance filling out the application. It was a little cumbersome. So they brought it back, and again, I assisted them filling it out. So I think one of the barriers is that they don't know about it, and then the complications of filling it out, and then the eligibility requirements. The level that was in the report too, two working parents, many of them are single-family homes with more than 2 children. And sometimes they didn't make the requirement. As soon as they got a promotion, then they lost subsidy. So it was a losing battle for them. As soon as they, even if I paid them more, they would lose their own childcare. So I think that's some of the barriers to childcare. So I think a solution, though, what I would like to, because I do want to say Montgomery County, compared to my counterparts in the past 25 years, I do think Montgomery County is doing an amazing job of supporting our industry and our businesses and our families and children, but of course it's not enough. So I do think that, and so I think if we're looking on the local and state level to do something immediately, it could be looking at that eligibility requirement and simplifying the process for enrollment.
Okay, next question's for you. So in your experience, both as a parent and also as a professional that helps families access mental health supports, what are the top 3 things that need to be addressed, changed, to ensure that children in Montgomery County can access the services that they need?
I think that we need to get to people early when kids are young, because I see mostly high school students, and the problems are big and very hard to solve, and lots of times there's a total loss of control of parent authority, and that's really hard to turn around, especially if a kid is violent. So I think addressing things as early as possible. Psychoeducation in the schools is really important, and I think a big thing for me is having families, students and parents have peer mentors. So I'm a therapist, I'm all for that, but I think there's a lot to be said about peer support. Somebody with a lived experience that can really walk the parent and the adolescent through the process that they really learn to value and trust. And I think that we are not really teaching children enough about how their brain works and about essential components to well-being: sleep, nutrition, exercise, nature, connectedness with spirit or a higher power or meaning, purpose in your life. So we spend a lot of time on go to therapy and this psychiatrist and this medication, and I see over and over again it's failing because the basic tenets of well-being are not in place. So even if you get therapy and you have access, it's kind of missing the mark. So I think we need to go back to the basics and spend a lot of time on that and offer alternative ways to healing. Go play basketball, lift weights, take a walk, ride a bike. If we could do that more in our schools, in our community as therapists, big brothers, big sisters, kids are lonely. They need mentors more than anything. And one of the things that I just wanted to point out in the report was the kids eligible for vocational school. We're losing kids. They don't feel motivated in school. They see no purpose for it. They're dropping out. They're getting arrested. They're getting pregnant. And I know I'm skewed to like the problems, but I think if we could catch them before they get to that point and offer them, you like to weld, you like to, whatever it is you like to do. Let's not wait till you're 16 years old and you're not coming to school. So I think there's a lot of things that we could do differently that really don't cost a lot of money, but we need to kind of shift what we're throwing our money at.
Great. Well, we're out of time, but I want to thank the 2 of you for sharing your perspective. And when I think about kind of my role as a commissioner in all of this, I look forward to really digesting the report, partnering with key stakeholders, because look, I'm raising a Black boy in Montgomery County, and that's another lens that I'm thinking about this, especially in this moment. and especially with some of the data that we saw, you know, it's scary for me as a mother, right? And I'm coming from a place of privilege. So I look forward to working with all of you. I want to thank you for your perspective, and let's give them a round of applause for doing that.
So much. I think that these are the kinds of conversations that need to be had in congressional hearings at this moment instead of what we're having right now. But that's why I'm so proud that Representative Matt Bradford is here. And Matt, I would love to introduce your friends in the House who are here. So we have Representative Wester, did Representative Scott, did I see him somewhere in the room, but maybe he stepped out? Huh? Oh, he's on a call. So thank you very much for being here. But Representative Bradford, come on. Oh, hey, how are you? Malgary, Representative Malgary, good to see you. So we're going to ask Superintendent Dormer and Megan Briggs to come on up and have a seat right here. And our goal in this conversation is, again, to just get way down on the ground, talk a little bit about what's happening in schools. These guys will tell you where they're from and what they're up to. And hopefully this, again, sheds light on sort of the many layers of tackling these challenges. Thank you.
Well, my first takeaway is if this was a talk show, that you should hire the county commissioner. She did a much better job and did it without a microphone. So if it's all right, I'll probably do it without the microphone if that works for everyone, because I'm not sure this one's working. So how about that? Okay, well, initially, let me just introduce myself. I'm Matt Bradford. I happen to be the state rep for a chunk of the Norristown School District, but I don't represent the borough anymore. That belongs to my friend and colleague, Greg Scott. But these are issues that are near and dear to my heart. I recognize, living in central Montgomery County, I represent an unbelievable spectrum of school districts. In a prior life, I represented parts of the North Penn School District, the Souderton School District, the Colonial School District, but currently represent Wissahickon and Perk Valley and the Methacton School District, where our 4 kids currently attend schools. Actually, we got one now in college. God lets me forget the tuition payment. But the one thing when I rattle off those school districts that I'm constantly reminded of, and it's something that the commissioner already said, is the unbelievable variety of school districts in terms of affluence and how many resources we're blessed with. But even within Montgomery County, seeing the report, just reminding how striking it is that while we are blessed in so many ways in Montgomery County, that there are still way too many kids that are not getting the resources and frankly the long-term opportunities that we'd want for my kids in the Methacton School District or anyone's kid anywhere in Montgomery County. And from being the majority leader of a caucus that's unbelievably diverse from Cambria County to Lackawanna County to Erie County, you realize Montgomery County as a whole is moving in the right direction, and we are further than many. But it is heartbreaking that not every county in Pennsylvania is as well resourced as we are. And I want to thank Donna and I want to thank Children's First for really shining a spotlight on the challenges that exist in the Commonwealth. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to saying a few things about what we're doing in Harrisburg and what we've done on the education funding issue, which I know we've got a lot of public education school advocates here. And I am thrilled with the progress that we've made with Governor Shapiro and a very slim House Democratic majority, but one that is often single-minded in its requirement, frankly, that we finally live up to our constitutional obligation to fully and equitably and fairly fund public education. And that is good news for every single parent, regardless of whether you're in the Methacton School District, the Norristown School District, the North Penn School District. This is probably our most important role, and it's been the driving force behind our majority. And I am so happy that Children's First released this report that shows just what progress we're making, but also the progress that we still need to make. So with that, instead of me speaking much more, I would love these 2 folks, Mr. Dormer, if you would please introduce yourself, as well as Megan. and tell everyone kind of what brings you here and what your day job is when you're not advocating for public education.
Which has really become my day job, because Matt sees me a lot in Harrisburg, especially this time of year. So, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming to Norristown and the IU. I'm Chris Stormer. I'm very proud to serve as the Superintendent of Schools of the Norristown Area School District. This is my 29th year in public education. Gray hair makes a lot of sense.
Better than the alternative.
This is my 9th year in the Norristown Area School District. I've been very fortunate to serve 2 years as Assistant Superintendent and now in my 7th year as Superintendent. And really, you know, I would say, you know, my personal work around, you know, the work we do in Norristown and the work that, that Matt and Steve and Greg and Joe see me do up in Harrisburg is to fight for every child in the Commonwealth. And certainly the 8,000 public school students we have here in Norristown and the 9,500 school-age kids that we have. It is about each and every child and making sure we're investing in our future. And, you know, some of the comments we're going to talk about is, you know, the cost that it takes to do that now in 2025. And to making sure that we're holding our governmental officials accountable for those resources we need to provide students with everything that they need, collectively and individually, so that they are ready for a bright future. And we are so very lucky here in Montgomery County that we have dedicated county commissioners, we have dedicated state officials. As I'm looking at Steve standing there, I think I know Steve as well as I do all of the electeds here in Montgomery County, beyond just my 3 state reps here within the school district. So, if you've not gotten to know your state reps, just know they fight for you every single day, regardless of party, and they're committed about the children here. So again, thank you for your passion and advocacy about kids.
Great, hi, my name is Megan Briggs, and I'm a parent in North Penn School District. My background is in,
A little closer.
Oh, closer? Oh.
Yep, thank you.
Sound very loud. And my background is in counseling, psychology. I've been a longtime advocate for public schools. I've been back and forth to Harrisburg with Children First and with Power Interfaith, and I'm very thankful to be here to represent and talk about public school funding in the context as a parent. I have a senior at North Penn High School who's about to graduate, and then 9th grader. Both of our kids are adopted and one is Black. Our 9th grader, we actually pulled him, he kind of chose to go to private school, which in a lot of ways breaks my heart. I'm thankful that we can provide that for him, like the commissioner said, and it simultaneously is uncalled for that not everyone can provide and do everything that they can for their kid, and I'm very torn about sending my kid to private school. Even a lot of it was his choice because my mom was a public school teacher, retired public school teacher in Michigan, and I can go on and on about how much I love North Penn School District. I'm so proud of North Penn School District. We're going to be, there in the stands as super proud parents when our son graduates in June. But a lot more that I look forward to sharing.
Well, thank you so much, Megan, and thank you for your perspective as a parent. But first, I'm going to ask Mr. Dormer a few questions, if I could. Obviously, last year we mentioned the historic first installment of equity funding that was driven out to school districts in Norristown. I believe got about $9.5 million specifically. Specifically, what did you do with those dollars? What are those investments like? What does it look like? What do you need going forward?
Sure, thank you for that, Leader Bradford. I do want to take a moment just to remind everybody to understand where we're going and understand where we've been. And I really want to start the journey back in 2008 when Pennsylvania legislatively made the decision to cut $1 billion from public education. And I can tell you the impact that had in Norristown, but I can guarantee it had an impact in every community, in every school, that we would put us behind the 8 ball. Here in Norristown, it set up a decade of raising taxes at or above our Act 1 index limit, spending our fund balance down to nothing, which was the reality when I took over as superintendent in 2018, and cutting staff and reducing programs every year for a decade. So you think about when you're a parent and a family member, what faith are you going to have in your schools where every year you're bringing them, I'm charging you more and you're getting less? And that was our reality for a decade. And then, thanks to Harrisburg, I think got a little bit of a wake-up call. We started seeing some investment. So here in Norristown, when I took over 7 years ago, I remember my first budget, it was a win when I was able to announce, we're not cutting staff. We raised taxes, but we didn't cut staff. We started to see some of the initial investments, the increases in money. We were able to sit there, and then all of a sudden we had a year with a 0% tax increase, and we were able to bring more staff on board. And it culminates, last year was really historic for us. As Rep. Bradford said, after a couple years of level up funding under Governor Wolf and the legislature, now we got our first investment in response to the lawsuit of adequacy, $9.5 million. What did it mean for Norristown? A fourth consecutive year of a 0% tax increase after raising taxes 33% the prior decade. Let me say that again, 33% the prior decade, we raised taxes. Why would you want to stay in that community when all we're doing is driving you out of your home? So finally, 4 straight years we did not raise taxes. That $9.5 million funded 59 new staff positions last year. And over the 3 prior years, we actually were able to invest 140 new staff positions in our school district. It undid a decade's worth of damage, and finally we were able to invest in the things we knew our children needed. So prior to all of this, in a district of 8,000 kids, would you be shocked if I told you we had 1 social worker for 8,000 students? That was the mental health support that we had. Now through some additional grant funds, we have over 24 that serve our students every single day, and we're able to sustain that. We moved from grant funding, and now these dollars allow us to sustain those contracts and get much needed mental health support to our students every single day. When I started as superintendent, we had zero reading specialists to support our neediest learners. With last budget, we now have 25 reading specialists in our school district, focusing with our early learners, but again, really focusing elementary and middle and trying to sit there and undo that decade of damage and kids coming behind. Recognizing, particularly coming out of COVID, the number of students, because of a lot of health decisions, kids that did not go to preschool, that did not go because of just fear of exposure and things like that. Those are our kindergartners now. And we're seeing the mental health, the social, the learning needs, and we were trying to catch them up. And we've been able to invest in new math resources. We've been able to invest in smaller class sizes. And the results are already there. Just in very short order with 2 level up investments in this. Last year when we were able to invest and train our staff in a new math series, year 1, and this never happens, educators will tell you this, when you put new curricular materials in, year 1 is usually like this little bit of a wobble because everyone's like trying to figure it out. Our elementary proficiency gained 10 percentage points in year 1. Our middle went up 5 points. Why? Because we had the money and the resources to provide for our kids. No surprise, give them good resources, great teachers, small class sizes, and small group help. What happens? Kids start performing. We started over the past couple years to invest in reading, and we're starting to see those gains move forward, and thankfully through some additional things through Senator Capoletti's office, we'll say hi to Alex over there, we're already ahead of the game. And this is amazing to say that Norristown's a leader in the state right now in structured literacy, which we know the legislator is talking about bringing that into law as a best practice for reading instruction. And we're already 3 years into that game because of the resources that we've been able to do. So again, everything that we're now able to provide our kids, it's needle up. Are we there where we need to be? No. Look at the report in front of you. We are at a point now where, the COVID bounce for us was pretty deep. But what I can tell you is we're there. In some areas we're a little bit ahead, but most importantly, the trajectory on all of our performances are up. And we're able to provide more specialized instruction, more specialized support for a community that continues to diversify here in Norristown. Just in my time here, we've gone from about 1 in about every 7 kids requiring special education to now we're at 1 every 5 kids requiring special education. Our English learner population has grown by about 125% in 8 years. We now have almost every 4 of our students is an English learner. And just the depth of service that they need. And just so you know, everyone's like, well, you get Title III money. $200,000 from the feds ain't doing it. And thankfully, we have a good formula under adequacy when the legislature that recognize what the real money is that we need. Year 1 was $9.5 million. When Donna put up there the $54 million that the county's owed, I think 40 of it's mine. No, I'm being serious. And Donna knows this. I think it's like.
Right. I didn't want everybody to.
Sorry, you set off the Hunger Games now.
But meaning to say, in all this, and I think everybody saw this with last year's budget, when you properly resource school districts, we can do amazing things.
So let me answer this before we turn it over for a parent's perspective. What's next? Obviously, when this was put in place, and we're very proud of it, and we were able to pick up some bipartisan support, where obviously it is, for many of us, non-negotiable that we will continue to do this for about 8 more years. And that is the type of investment it's going to take to fully get to where we need to be. But from a Norristown perspective, from your perspective, what does that look like next year? And what are the top 3 needs? What do you need to accomplish to go to the next level? Because let's be honest, the dollars are great and we can feel good about ourselves, but we need to be talking about student performance. We need to be talking about what the impact long-term has been on our property tax base. What does that look like? How do we change perceptions and turn real student achievement into reality?
And I want to compliment our board that we are in the process of adopting a student outcome focused governance model where our communities can start seeing our data much more regularly. I think for a long time we were scared to put it out there, and we're not doing that. We were proud of the accomplishment we made, and we're also honest enough now to recognize we do have groups of students that are lagging behind. Our English learners are lagging. Our special education students are lagging. When you look at demographics, our black students are lagging. Our Hispanic students are lagging. That's just real data, and I can't shy away from that, because if we don't focus on that, we're never going to move the needle on that. If we don't acknowledge that and drive the resources where they need to go, those outcomes don't change. But I think, Matt, really, when you look at the 3 things that we're going to continue to invest in, first and foremost is we need to continue to invest in staff. I talk about a decade worth of staff reductions and 140 new positions. Sounds awesome. Believe it or not, I think we just got to the break-even point. Let alone when you talk about adequacy, what we really should have had all along. When I talk about reading specialists, we really have driven that at the lower levels. We know there's a ton of things we need to invest in the high school level. We know we need to continue to invest in mental health supports and things like that. The other thing is programming. I think we've really done a great job with 2 consecutive curriculum cycles now to really get rich, robust, meaningful learning experiences. But 2 things with that. 1, how do we continue to invest in the very best resources for kids and experiences for kids? But second, how can we then personalize that to things that are personally meaningful to kids? I think anyone in education knows when a student can latch onto something with personal context, they grow by leaps and bounds. I'll tell you just a very quick story that I had when, just not too long ago. One of my English language teachers had this great lesson, and her hook was she tried to get kids to understand this concept in reading, and her reference was The Wizard of Oz. That's great. Everybody in the room said that's awesome. You know what my reflection was? Which of your kids you think has ever seen The Wizard of Oz? And she went, oh. And she said, now it makes sense why they went blank when I mentioned that in class. They had no context. So how do we sit there and make meaning personally relevant to kids? The third one, I think, is something that we're really seeing is a broader conversation statewide, and I'll say in Norristown, and I know North Penn, not to bring up a sore point, facilities. A lack of funding over the years. We have deferred literally hundreds of millions of dollars worth of facility upkeep. And I know we've done everything from looking at paint in our schools, because schools should be places that are vibrant, they're exciting, where kids want to come, and they're places where they feel great about being in the space. Most of my schools in Norristown are 65 plus years old. And yes, we've kept up with the minimum of like the roofs don't leak and the windows are that and we have air conditioning, great. But our buildings look and feel really old. And I think every kid, when you talk about a rigorous and robust and modern educational experience, they deserve to be educated in buildings that prepare them for the future. And my about to turn 100-year-old Bloxham Middle School that is not ADA compliant is not doing it. It's not. We have a plan to address it. Matt knows this. Just in Norristown alone, for us to take care of our facilities, Joe knows this, $330 million over the next decade. I don't do that without more state funding because I can't raise taxes high enough to sustain that kind of investment in our kids. And it's not about me, and it's not about the adults. Our kids deserve those kind of schools that are going to get them ready for a modern future. Full stop there. And I know North Penn is undergoing the work and is again looking for the dollars to invest in children. So let's not lose sight about all the dollars we spend. We're going to be north of a $220 million budget this year. It's about investing in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Dormer. Next, I really want to turn over to Megan and get a perspective from a parent. Obviously, North Penn is not traditionally thought of as an underfunded district, blessed in many ways. But from a parent perspective, it often comes at like, there's real things that we're seeing where we're just missing the mark. And I'd kind of like to get your perspective. Just fundamentally, where do you think those needs exist currently in North Penn?
Two major issues, facilities. No, I say three major issues, facilities, special education, and facilities. Our schools, our high school specifically is literally crumbling. My son will be end of his third year now, and it's not avoiding leaks, and the AC and heat is not adequate, and the teachers talk about it all the time. So to kind of combat that and to move forward with possibly maxing out what property owners pay taxes, North Penn administration and board decided to do a special election last January to ask the taxpayers if it was okay to raise their property taxes beyond what was allowable to build a new high school facility that is 70 years old. I mean, it's very bad, and a lot of parts of the building feel very sad to be in. No windows, like drab, very bad. And so we were all very excited, and of course there were people in the community that were pushing back even on the special election and the resources going into it and all of that, but it didn't pass, and it was devastating for my son and teach and all of the staff and faculty that I know. My son came home and he was like, they don't care about us. They were all very disappointed. And he's graduating. He's like, this will be for my brother and for our community. And the school district did so much. I mean, I have been privy to it, and I'm very involved in that way. And I substitute teach in the district. So there's aspects that I know and see more. But if it was just from my child's perspective, it's a crumbling infrastructure. And many of the kids spend most of their days in modulars. So the middle school, two of the middle schools have modulars kind of all around. Many of the elementary schools do too. So, and this has been years and years. But thankfully, because of my involvement with advocating for public schools, I was so devastated and frustrated and kind of like angry with the way that the election turned out. And then it dawned on me, like, this is a Harrisburg issue. Like, this is formula funding, like the way the formula is with property taxes and with knowing that the state is sitting on funds that should have been going to public schools for years.
So I know you. This is not great. So I know you rightfully point out the issues that you guys are having with capital needs, but some of the issues that also been raised sometimes is staffing, just a lack of qualified, certified teachers. How does that play out in your kids' case in specific, but just kind of anecdotally, what's it look like?
Yeah, I mean, the reason why my younger son ended up is at a private school is because of the size. And I know this is something that, if we could go back in time, North Penn School District would be 3 school districts and not 1. 13 middle schools, 13 elementary schools, 3 huge middle schools, and a gigantic high school. And it was just too chaotic for him, and he was having a very hard time navigating it. So as far as my perspective, I love North Penn staff and faculty, and they've always been very responsive. I think that North Penn does a stellar job of staffing and the people that they hire. And I haven't had as much personal need with my kids, but many, my kids started kindergarten there and now I'm a senior, obviously, so it's been several years of lack of even negligence in special education. And I know with the funding that North Penn got, all of the districts, they put it into staffing, and then the COVID funding was put into aides in kindergarten classrooms. So I personally, again, it goes to like the building issue and how it kind of can feel chaotic for kids who have certain special needs, ADHD, like that kind of stuff. But when it comes to all of the stories that I've heard from so many parents of just the need when kids have special needs, that it takes so much parent advocacy.
So I'm just going to wrap up if I can, but one of the things that, while we're obviously trying to target funding, and the Commonwealth Court case required to make sure that it's going through a, for lack of a better word, a fairness formula to try to make sure that those districts habitually left behind. One of the things we're most proud of is that no school district, every school district frankly received more funding. But listen, it's a challenge when it's over 8 years. So we're proud to see that. I just want to thank you both for the job you do. It is truly amazing what we've been able to accomplish, thanks to, frankly, the work of advocates, including the indefatigable Donna Cooper. I was going to wonder if I could get it right. But as well, Mr. Dormer, you just do an amazing job in a district that is close to many of our hearts and recognize the amazing job you do. And frankly, none of it's possible without parents that care and that are willing to advocate for their kids and for their district and for their community. So I just want to thank you both. And with that, I will turn it over to the aforementioned Donna Cooper.
Thank you. And Representative Scott, now that you're back in the room, I wanted to make sure everybody's noticed that you were here. Thank you. I know we're in your district, so it's great to be here. We want to thank the Monco IU. So you can see that your congresspeople, and Madeleine Dean has had an emergency. I apologize, well, she apologizes profusely, but you can see that your congresspeople, your commissioners, your state representatives are deeply concerned about the issues that affect kids. We have, if you want, we have a few minutes left, and I'd love to give the opportunity to ask questions. If somebody has a question, anybody at this table or anything about the data, that would be great. Please say your name and sort of what neighborhood you live in, or township, or school district. Anybody got a question? Or because it's 5:25, everybody's...
Hi, I'm Angie Hinton. Everybody knows me. I play a lot of roles in this community. And so, this is heartbreaking. It is heartbreaking. And as a person that represents the community in Norristown, the great disparity that continues in this community is a problem. And so what I really hope we can focus on is the funding formula But what are we doing to really try to make sure that we are addressing the inequity that exists within, when it comes to impoverishment, when it comes to outcomes for our school, access to recreational programming, all of those things, social determinants of health, would play a real role in whether or not our students are going to be successful. And I can tell you, in Norristown, there are so many things that need to happen for our kids to have any sort of equal chance of, achieving, all of what they really could and should be able to achieve. And so that is really what I'm hoping comes out of this, is how are we going to really finally come together, these surrounding townships and communities, to really care enough to make sure that we're ensuring that these kids have the same opportunities as kids in all of these other more wealthy and affluent communities. I mean, not for nothing, right? But we heard all this with this school and how desperately underfunded they are. And we're making these capital investments sometimes, and it's sad. These kids feel like they don't matter. They feel like nobody cares, and so why should they? And so I would just implore all of us to take all of this and figure out how can we care more, to really come together and figure out what are we going to do for these kids in Norristown and Pottstown that are predominantly black and brown, to make sure they have an equal chance as the rest of this very wealthy and affluent county.
So, Ange, I think that was a statement rather than a question, and a call to action that was perfect. And I can't think of a better way to end the program with that like call to action, because all of us who live in this county or have relationships in this county have to make sure that we close the inequities that we see for these kids.
Hey Donna, can I
Yeah.
just react?
Oh, I would love for you to.
So let me just say this. Look, I said I grew up in this area, went to Norristown schools, and Angie, when I think about the fight, so my mother was an educator in Philadelphia. She fought then, right? So that I could have an equitable education, right? So, and I'm 46, right? So it's very easy when you are not affected, right? And you don't see it every day. It's very easy to just turn a blind eye, but there are communities in Montgomery County that are suffering. There are school districts that are suffering. And so I think it's incumbent upon all of us to not turn a blind eye, that if everything's okay in Upper Marion, and if everything's okay in Lower Marion, how can you lend some assistance to our friends and neighbors that are still struggling? So I just want to honor what you've said, and because it's been I've seen the fight for a really long time. And when I think about putting my son Max in Paul V. Fly Elementary School, I sometimes have to stop and think, is that the best place to send him? And I'm Norristown proud, right?
Yeah.
So,
No, I don't wanna cut you off.
we'll but I just want to acknowledge that. So that's every ally in this room that doesn't look like us. It's other people coming together to really help us solve the complexities that exist in Norristown, Pottstown, Shelton.
Thank you. I know the Congresswoman wanted to respond too.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the things that just breaks my heart every day. So before Congress, before doing pro bono work for a national firm, I spent a decade at the Education Law Center of Pennsylvania. So, dealing with complaints from school districts across the country, or across the Commonwealth, participating in legislation and class action suits, the precursors to the one that finally got across the board. So we are really grateful to the state reps who have been pushing to try to meet the constitutional obligation that's finally been recognized. But the Ed Law Center was formed like over 50 years ago to try to address the inequities in our school funding system. So now my district is Norristown, Bridgeport, Upper Marion. I mean, just the spread there is pretty wild. But I also have Chester, Philadelphia. I was on the school board in Wallingford, Swarthmore at the same time I was working, at the Ed Law Center. So I'd be going into schools in Philadelphia, and then I'd be dealing with the more suburban complaints of my neighbors. And it's really, really hard. But I think making sure that people understand that it is grotesquely inequitable in this state still. And we do have that work to move forward, but the kids are worth it, and we just have to keep fighting.
Right, and it's a terrific call to action to think about how people in the county, it's not just the schools, right? It's where is healthcare, where is recreation? Sousan talked about where is nature, meaning the things that are gonna really be the broad, that's sort of why we do this report, so people can galvanize and think about it. Yes, in the back. Good. Yep.
Me, Donna? Okay, good. Thank you, first of all.
Name and what neighborhood?
So, my name is Carmina Taylor, and I'm from Wissahickon School District. I facilitate a countywide group called the Montgomery County Cultural Proficiency and Equity Student Ambassadors. We are going to have a DEI summit, a countywide DEI summit in Norristown on April 26th. I've been working with the superintendent. I just want you to keep this nugget, okay? First of all, we have to all agree that we want to care about human beings, and we want all human beings to thrive, so that's the solution. But this is the nugget I want to leave you with. 85% of the black students in Montgomery County in all 23 school districts, when you clump it together, 85% of the black students are 50% or below proficient in reading and math. So the superintendent challenged me. He said that would mean, in order for them to catch up, that that white and Asian students would have to stop learning in order for black kids to get to the level of proficiency that they're at. So we have to care about everyone thriving and have that mindset that even though, and I used to say that at Wissahickon, my kids were in middle school and high school, but I cared about the kids in the elementary school, even though they weren't mine. Not about color, just about we're all one Wissahickon. So I would like to invite everyone. Is Domer here? Did he leave?
I think he's on the call.
Oh, and Jamila knows because I publicly invited the county commissioners, and which, by the way, we all need to give Jamila a round of applause because she killed it her first year in leadership. Can we give her applause? But the point is, and simultaneously, I've been traveling around the state in rural communities, and I know very well how they're struggling and how kids are struggling because of the lack of resources. Here's the thing, Montgomery County is looked upon as one of the best counties in the state. And so we have to rise up and be a model for the state reps, and we have to be a model for those other communities that don't get talked to and don't get reached out to. I've been all over, McKean, Elk, Southwest, Northwest, and we need to rise up and make our work a national narrative. And I am biased in terms of the leadership at the county level, but it's gonna take all of us, but we all have to care about every human being and their plights. And where the gaps exist, we need to challenge ourselves to how do we collectively work together. Without political affiliation, without socioeconomic division, we need to care about human beings, and all of you need to be at our DEI summit in April.
Thank you. So, you know, your comment really brings to light one thing I hope people understand, that the way in which the new school funding happened. Thank you, Josh Shapiro. Thank you, Matt Bradford, Joanna McClinton, and Jordan Harris. But they also had bipartisan support. Right. And it didn't happen without rural legislators seeing what was in it for them. And 181 rural school districts, like Pottstown and Norristown, are in desperate situations. Absolutely. And so this state had to pick it up for everybody. Absolutely. And speaking of bipartisan, I want to embarrass John Taylor and just ask him, he's a former state rep, he's a Children First board member, and we're so proud that he's here as a former state rep and our board member, and make sure people know that a current state rep, Napoleon Nelson's here as well. So with that, I hope everybody thinks, since it's 5:30, this conversation is a beginning, not an end. We hope you'll use it to ask Emma for a lot of money, and other foundations in the county. We'll go to the DEI summit, we'll work with the county commissioner to increase equity of county resources, and we'll fight for school funding equity. This year, another $1 billion on the table. We're gonna need all of you to come to Harrisburg. So thank you very much.